Hey friends, and welcome to the Happy Hour Jamie Ivey podcast. I'm your host, Jamie, and I'm super excited that you're here. Every week, I invite a girlfriend to join me on the show, and we chat about the big things in life, the little things in life, and everything in between. First, I want to say welcome to November. We made it through October. We survived Halloween, which I must tell you is my least favorite holiday of the entire year. I hate the grabbing of candy, the stuff in your face. It's not my favorite. But we're done with it, and we're moving on. And then we moved to Thanksgiving, which is my favorite holiday, and then Christmas, which is my very tied close with Thanksgiving. Speaking of Christmas, I want to thank one of our sponsors today, and that is Sacred Holidays. This Advent, if you don't know, are the days leading up to Christmas. That's what we call Advent. And this Advent, Sacred Holidays has released a new study for you to go through, and it is called He Is, the Attributes of God. There's one for women, there's also one for families, there's one for men, and one for teen girls as well. Every day will be a different attribute of God, but each study will focus on the same attribute each day, but have unique content allowing families, churches, and communities to do the study together. So you can have one for yourself and one for your husband, and it's different content, but the same attribute. I was super honored to be a contributor to this study for the women, and I have seen the list of the other contributors, and you are going to love everything they're going to say to point you straight to God in this Advent season, which is what we need, right? Right now, they're going to give 10% of their profits back to providing Advent studies for women in prison. You know, this is near and dear to my heart. In fact, the jail that I attend every Tuesday, the women in my program are going to get these journals because of you. You can order the study at sacredholidays.com and use the promotion code HAPPYHOUR to get 10% off your order. And if you didn't remember that, don't worry, it's on my webpage, jamieivey.com. I'd love for you to follow them on Instagram as well. It's at Sacred Holidays, and you can see what they're doing. Guys, today you're listening to episode number 113 with Sarah Rodriguez. And Sarah and I recorded this a while ago, and I'm finally getting it in. And let me tell you, this was an example of where I just got a random book in the mail from someone, and I couldn't stop reading it. Sarah has a story where she's been through more heartache in such a short period of her life than a lot of us will have our entire lives. She's experienced infertility, her husband's cancer diagnosis, her husband's death, miscarriages, her baby girl fighting for her life. Literally, she has been through so much, and she comes on this other side, still clinging strong to her faith and proclaiming the good news of Jesus. So I loved our conversation. Get your tissues out because you're going to need them. But Sarah and I had such a great time talking, and she has a book out called From Depths We Rise, and I'll have a link to it over my webpage. If you want to send us a message about anything we chatted about, we'd love to hear from you. You know I love Instagram, and I'm Jamie Ivey over there. But if you want to find us on Twitter, I'm at Jamie_Ivey, and Sarah, my guest today, is at Journey of Sarah. Okay, guys, one more favor before we get going. I would love it if you subscribe to the show. Even if you listen every single week, it really helps if you head on over to iTunes and just hit that little purple subscribe button. And then you get the show in your inbox every single week. Just go to jamieivey.com/iTunes. All right, friends, here is my conversation with Sarah.
Hello.
Hey, Sarah.
Hi, Jamie.
Welcome to the Happy Hour.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled to be here.
I'm so excited to be chatting with you.
Oh, my goodness.
Where are your babies right now?
They are at home with a sitter.
And you are where?
I am at my parents' because it's quiet here.
Girl, I hear you with that. You got to get away.
I know. I thought, well, I could go in my closet or I could go somewhere else.
Well, I have big kids, and there's always a chance they're going to interrupt in the summer. So
Oh,
I get
yeah.
it. I get it. Well, I am so happy to be chatting with you. I just will let you know, I was up till 1 a.m. reading your book last night.
Oh, my goodness.
My husband was at an event, and then he had something really late, and so he wasn't home. And I have a hard time sleeping before he gets home, so I just was like, I had already started it, I had skimmed it, preparing for an interview, skim it, and then I was like, I'm going to dive in. And I didn't skim, I read. I didn't read the whole thing, but I read a lot, and am so thrilled and honored to have you come on the show and chat about your story.
I'm so excited to be here. I love your podcast. I listen to it all the time. So it's a big part of my routine.
I'm so glad. I love hearing people listen. I mean, I hope people listen. So thank you for listening to the show.
Yes.
Okay, so you're in Oklahoma.
Yes, I am in Norman, Oklahoma.
Is that the University of Oklahoma?
Yes, Jamie, it is.
Are you a Sooner?
I am a Sooner, and I know you're a Longhorn, but I'm hoping we can still be friends.
We can put it all aside.
Yeah.
Did you go to Oklahoma University?
I did not.
Okay.
I went to Bible college in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I kind of wanted to get away and experience life outside of Norman a little bit. So,
well, I didn't go to the University of Texas, but we live here, so we're Longhorn fans. But I always feel like everyone's like, "Did you go there?" I'm like, "No, I didn't," but whatever.
Yeah.
What Bible college did you go to?
I went to Victory Bible College.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it's right across the street from ORU.
Was that Oral Roberts?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah, where the big praying hands are. I don't know if you've been there or not, but that's how most people
I haven't been there, but
is.
I've heard of Oral Roberts, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you went to Bible college, and then what'd you do? Because I know you ended up in New York City, and we just jumped in, but I want to just hear how you got to New York.
Yeah, after Bible college, I did an internship working with inner city kids in a ministry in Brooklyn, New York, and I absolutely loved it. I was there for about 4 months. And then I came back home to Oklahoma, and I quickly realized that New York was where I wanted to be. And so my dad's, basically both of my parents were like, well, you can't move to New York unless you get a job first.
Right.
And I thought, how am I going to do that? And so I found this job. I think it was on monster.com. I don't even know if that site is still up or not, but I found a job as a receptionist, and I called the woman and practically begged her to give me a job.
You're like, I have to get to New York City.
You don't understand. And so that was on a Friday, and she said, okay, you've got the job. Can you be here and start on Monday? And I was like, absolutely.
Oh my gosh, you were determined.
Yes. And my parents were like, what? I think they didn't think that I'd be able to execute the plan.
Right.
But I did. And so I hopped on a plane with 2 bags and went for it.
That's amazing. Okay, so you landed in New York City, and I think this is where you met your husband. Is that what I read?
Yes. My mom, before I left, this is how the book starts. She said, you can go to New York, but please just don't meet any boys. Because
she didn't want you to stay in New York is what she didn't want.
Exactly. And so I said, it is so hard to meet a boy in New York. That is not even on my radar. Right. And of course, I met my husband, Joel, the first month I was there. So I didn't follow my mom's advice, but it all worked out in the end. Yeah, it did.
So you have your first book out. It's called From Depths We Rise.
Yes.
It's a journey of beauty from ashes. And like I told you, I got sucked into it last night. Mm-hmm. And your story is a very hard story. And I would say, and you tell me if you agree with me, probably one of maybe women's worst fears. You've walked through several of them. Mm-hmm. And so I think as I was reading it, I kind of, whenever I read people's stories, memoirs are my favorite kind of books to read. So you're reading someone's story, and although you may not identify with what the author's gone through, you identify with some of their emotions, or you identify with things they learned from their experience. And that's what I was feeling last night when I was reading your book. But your story is one of hardship. You met your husband. And then eventually we'll jump right to the end of what happened. And then I want to talk about what happened was that your husband passed away from complications, from cancer and a stroke. And so worst fear. Would you have said this was one of your worst fears?
Absolutely. And it's something that you think will never happen to you ever. And so I feel like it's been 3 years. It's 3 years since he passed away, and I'm still trying to process it in many ways. Sometimes it still doesn't feel real.
Doesn't feel like it really happened, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So your husband, Joel, where's that name come from?
It is basically Joel, but it's a Spanish way of pronouncing it.
He was Puerto Rican, right?
Yeah, he's Puerto Rican. He grew up in Spanish Harlem, New York. So he's a New Yorker through and through.
You met yourself a New Yorker man.
Yes, I did.
Just like your mama warned you about.
Exactly.
Oh, so your husband, walk us through just that first. I mean, you do it so beautifully in your book, and I want to talk about that with you, about finding out, sitting in the doctor's office and finding out that the worst fear has come true. The things you've Googled, everyone says don't go to the internet. The things you Googled, your husband found blood in his urine. And then you're sitting in the doctor's office and they confirm a worse fear. Take me back to that. I don't know how many years ago that was.
That was in 2010.
Okay, 6 years ago.
And actually, before his cancer diagnosis, the worst thing we had experienced to date was infertility. We had been trying for years and years to get pregnant and weren't able to. So it got to the point where we were told that IVF was our only option. So we were about to start IVF, but before we did that, we wanted to do some bucket list things. So we trained for and ran a marathon, or a half marathon.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We did that, and then we were about to go on a trip to celebrate our 5th wedding anniversary. And just one day I'm sitting there and he comes in and he says, "Babe, there's blood in my urine." And so I immediately was like, "Oh, it's going to be okay. It's not a big deal. Just go to the doctor." And so they thought it was kidney stones. They gave him different medications. And this was a couple-week process where they just couldn't get it under control. And then one day he came in and he was as white as a sheet. And he said, "I just passed a really large blood clot." So that was a really scary moment. And he went back to the doctor and they took a CT scan. And they called us back for results the next day. And I was still thinking, it's got to be kidney stones. I would have never in a million years thought cancer.
So you didn't go there?
I went with him. Yeah.
Your mind didn't go to cancer.
Oh, no. I mean, the crazy thing is my husband lost both of his parents to cancer. And so that was, it wasn't something that we had never experienced in our world. And I think he was probably a lot more sensitive to it than I was. But I never would have dreamt that it would have been that.
That's where I feel like, you always try to, I'm sure as listeners are listening, as I'm reading your book last night, as I'm listening to you, you put yourself in the shoes and think, what would I do? And I know myself. And Sarah, I would tend to be like, oh, I would immediately plan his funeral, if that happened to Aaron. And I don't know where that comes from and why some people are like that and why some people are not. And I don't know what I would do in that moment. So, I love to hear how you were like, no, I just thought that this is surely kidney stones. This can't be cancer. And then you got the diagnosis, and then what?
Well, we got the diagnosis and they said that it was a 7-pound tumor in his abdomen, which is crazy to me to think about. I would tell him it was like you were pregnant with a baby, and
exactly.
We didn't even know it. You just ran
all pregnant
marathon.
women are like, what? How did you have a 7-pound tumor? Which that is huge, Sarah.
Yes, and it's shocking to me that he had no other symptoms.
So there was no pain.
No, nothing. And they said that it had probably been growing for years.
And it was surrounding one of his kidneys. Is that right?
It had completely eaten one of his kidneys. So his body had naturally just shut off that kidney and started working on one. So the very first thing was we had to go into surgery and remove it. And so we did that. And then afterwards, they sent us down to the hospital in Houston, the cancer hospital down there, and they recommended a year of chemo. And so that was immediately following. We did every 6 weeks, we would fly down to Houston, do scans, get orders, then come back to Oklahoma City and do his chemo treatment for a whole year.
And for that year, was he working? Was he able to function? What does a year of chemo look like on someone?
The first time he did chemo, he did not work.
Okay.
We didn't really know what to expect. And in fact, the first few chemo infusions, he had to do inpatient, week-long inpatient infusions. And so he wasn't working. And eventually, when he applied for long-term disability, the company terminated his job. So everything was on me at that point. I was the one working for a year, and I was the one with the insurance for both of us. So it was a lot of weight on my shoulders. And I was only 28 years old at that time, and it was really heavy.
I'm sure. And so at this point, what's going on with IVF?
IVF was totally in the background. The only thing we made the choice to do, and in hindsight, this was a choice that changed the trajectory of my life forever, is we made a choice to freeze his sperm before we started chemo. Because a lot of people don't know that chemo can render a man sterile. And it's just by the grace of God that we found that out before. So the whole week before he started chemo, we collected and froze some sperm, and that's what we would use in our future family planning.
Wow.
Yeah. But everything else went on the back burner. We didn't do anything else. We just kind of had that in storage as an insurance policy.
Yeah.
be. Yeah.
Just in case it did affect his, okay, I got it. All right. So y'all are kind of put that on the back burner. You're working, carrying the weight of that, which I'm sure was just stressful.
Yeah, I worked in the oil and gas industry at the time, and it's a really volatile industry, lots of ups and downs, and layoffs are common. So every single day I was just praying, God, please don't let me lose my job, because I have to have this insurance for my husband. So
a week of chemo, and then what happens?
a week
I mean, a year of chemo. Sorry, a year of chemo, and then what happens?
And then he got the all clear. And so we were so excited, and we were like, okay, this is behind us. We're going to move forward. We're going to start our family. And since we had frozen the sperm, we were able to do that immediately. Typically, they recommend taking a year off from anything fertility because of how the chemo will affect things. But since we had the pre-chemo sperm, we were able to jump right in, and we did. And our first round, we got 4 embryos, and we implanted 2. And I got pregnant the very first time with twins. And I lost one of those twins at the end of my first trimester, but I was able to carry the other baby to term.
Okay, and that's your son?
Yes, my son Milo. He just turned 4.
Milo,
love him.
He is a cutie. So you get pregnant, and in all that you're thinking, you and your husband, Joel, you're thinking this whole cancer journey is behind us. We're pregnant, finally. It's like a new chapter.
Yeah, and we had, spent so many years trying to get pregnant, and that was a hit. And then came the cancer, which was another hit. And so then when we finally got pregnant, and with twins much less, we were just like, this is our moment of redemption and rejoicing, and like everything is going to be better from here. That was what we thought.
Did you feel almost as though, I don't know if you felt this. I wonder if people think this sometimes when you feel like the worst is behind us. Did you ever think like, surely that we've paid our dues? Like, like this, nothing else can happen. Like we've had enough, God.
Yeah, I think that, especially even in the Christian culture, I don't know what it is about us feeling like suffering should not be something that we ever have to endure. And then we definitely think we've met our quota. And God's not going to give us any more suffering. We've done enough.
Yeah.
But we had no idea what was still to come.
So you're pregnant, have baby Milo. And that, I'm sure, was just one of the most like joyous occasions with you and your husband ever, like something you've been yearning for so long. But it quickly kind of took a different turn. What happened right after Milo was born?
Well, a couple weeks before he was born, Joel went in for scans, and they saw what they called an area of concern on his lung. And they told us that we needed to wait a couple weeks until it got bigger, and they wanted to biopsy it just to see what it was. And at that point in time, I was pretty sure that we were talking about cancer again, which was devastating because I was only 4 days away from having Milo when he got the biopsy. And then we got the news 3 days after Milo's birth that the cancer had come back in his lung.
Did I read that you had the option to get the news on a Friday and y'all just waited till Monday?
Yes, that makes me almost cry when I think about it, because they had told us we could call on Friday, and Friday was the day after I had Milo. And I remember this like it was yesterday, being in the hospital and telling Joel, babe, I bet your results are ready. And he said, can we just hold off? Can we just wait until Monday? And I said, yeah, because none of us wanted to face what was coming. We knew what was coming, but we just wanted to enjoy that moment of being new parents like anybody would.
Did you get to enjoy that weekend, or was that was that thought of Monday's coming? Was it heavy on your heart, or did you truly wait till Monday to face it?
No, it was always the elephant in the room, and I think I thought about it even more because here I am, a mom, and I just thought, God, my boy cannot lose his father. Just please, he cannot lose his father. And I think that was the prayer that I prayed over and over that weekend. Is just please, please.
So you call on Monday. And you get the news over the phone? Yeah.
The doctor gave him the news over the phone, and I was sitting in the room just listening, and Joel just looked up at me and nodded his head.
Which said it's cancer.
It's cancer. It's back. It's in his lung. We need to have surgery tomorrow to put your port back in, and we start chemo.
You have now we're looking at probably a 5-day-old baby.
Mm-hmm.
And your husband goes in for surgery.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah.
It was hard. I mean, he couldn't even hold Milo because they had the surgery for the port, and so he had stitches. And I mean, I just was weeping for him because I could not imagine having a newborn and being told you can't hold your baby. It was just horrible.
Okay, so he gets his port in, and so this means we're starting chemo all over again.
Mm-hmm.
How did that chemo look this time?
This time we didn't go back and forth between Houston. They were able to send the orders to Oklahoma City, which was a huge blessing. So he did his treatments in Oklahoma City, and it was hard because I felt really torn because the first time we walked through cancer, I was at every chemo appointment. I was at every doctor appointment. I didn't miss anything. But now I had a newborn son, and I felt so torn between being there with Joel or being there with Milo. And Joel took that load off me. He would say, babe, you need to be there for Milo. I've done this before. I can do it again. And I would just cry because I just felt the tension, and I felt like I wasn't being everything for either of them. But that was the decision that we had to make. We felt like we had to make was I would take care of Milo, and Joel would do chemo.
And how long did that go on for?
It was another 9 months of chemo, and he worked this time.
Oh.
And he kept it a secret. Not very many people knew because he was scared that he would lose his job. So, I mean, I just look back, I'm like, I don't know how he did it. I mean, he kept working, and then he would leave and go to chemo and then come back to work the next day. So,
what was your support system like for you guys during that time?
Well, you know, my family is here in Oklahoma. His is in New York, so they were supporting from afar. But we had my family and our church community, and all of our friends had been through it once with us before. So, you know, everybody kind of manned their stations and knew what to do.
Okay, so 9 months of chemo, and then does he go in for surgery? What happens next?
Well, 9 months of chemo, and then he went in for a doctor's visit, and they said, well, we think it's all gone. We don't see a lot on a scan, so let's go ahead and have you guys take a break. And so we took a break. We went on a trip to Breckenridge and with our little family, and we're just kind of hoping that again, praying for the best that it was gone. And we went back for more scans. I think it had been 4 to 6 weeks, somewhere in there. And they told us, they said, it's not only back, but it's grown completely to the size that it was pre-chemo.
Jeez.
So basically 9 months.
So the chemo had done nothing?
Nothing. It completely reversed itself back. It was a really, really aggressive cancer.
And that's just because of the nature of it? There's nothing they could have done?
No, there's nothing. He had something called Ewing sarcoma, and sarcoma cancers are known to be some of the worst that you get.
So you get this news. Would you say that was the biggest blow of all these years?
Oh yeah. I mean, that was really the first time that I saw him get really, really down, because he's like, man, I dedicated 9 months of my life to this, and it's just nothing. You start to feel like it's starting to get out of control a little bit, because you're doing everything you can in your own might. You're praying it, and it's like nothing is working. So I think that the fear level in both of us kind of started to escalate by that point.
So what would you guys do? I mean, were these conversations that you're having? I'm just imagining inside your home at night. Are you having conversations about what if this goes the way that we both don't want it to go? Do y'all have those conversations in the midst of all this journey?
You know, that's something we never talked about. We never said, what if, because we were just both trying to stay so positive. And he was actually more positive than me, I would say, but I'm scared. And he would say, I'm going to beat this. Don't worry. I'm going to beat this. I'm going to come through. I'm going to be here. And so we would never let our minds go there. I think it's kind of a rabbit hole if you do, like, you know, if he doesn't, well, then what? Well, then what? Well, then what? Well, we're not to that point yet. We're not there yet. So let's stay positive and focused. And you have to stay focused because it's the battle for your life.
Are you grateful that y'all never went there?
I am. I mean, in some ways, you know, I've met other widows who've had an extended time where they knew they were saying goodbye. And so they were able to have some conversations about, you know, the future. And we never had a lot of those. And in a way, I wish that I had prepared my heart a little bit more, but then in a way I don't, because I lived every moment in the moment, fully and presently.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you'll tell the rest of the story in a minute, but you guys never you never knew this is my last time. Yeah, just the way that his medical situation worked out. So then what happens next after this is going on?
So we make the decision to go ahead and have surgery. And by this point, we had done chemo. We were also trying to do anything holistically, natural medicine. I mean, we were throwing everything we could at this thing, and nothing was happening. So we made the decision to have the surgery. To remove half of one of his lungs, to remove the cancer. And he did. And he got through surgery successfully.
And so can I ask you a question about that surgery?
Yeah.
Was that surgery once they removed that portion of the lung, was the intent that then you could go on living like that?
I think it depended on the pathology and how it came back. If he had clear margins, if it had spread to his lymph nodes, that's all kind of up in the air once they get in there and get those tests back.
Okay, so he has the surgery.
Yeah, he has the surgery, and then the next morning I'm in his room and a nurse is just doing some vitals checks on him, and she squeezes his left hand and she's saying, can you squeeze my hand? Can you squeeze my hand? And he wasn't squeezing her hand. And so after a little bit she calls the doctor, and the doctors come running in the room and they're screaming his name and trying to get him to respond, and Joel's not.
Had he been previously responding while you were in there?
No, he had been on a ventilator.
From the surgery.
Yeah, and I was holding his hand, but I was on his other side. I was on his right side, and he had been responsive to holding my hand, but he was sedated.
Okay.
So I really wasn't aware that anything was wrong until these doctors come flooding in the room, and then they turn to me and they're like, "We think your husband's had a massive stroke. We're not sure if he's going to make it." And my head is spinning.
My gosh, yeah.
Because I'm like, we were talking about cancer yesterday, and we're talking about a stroke, and I thought older people, had strokes. I was there by myself. Nobody was there with me, and it was...
I mean, it sounds like a scene from a movie.
I know. In many ways, people tell me all the time, your life would make a really good movie.
But I mean, the doctor's running in and screaming. Yeah. I mean, that's like what you see in a movie, and you were living it. You were in the moment right then. So they have you leave. They think, your husband, we think, has had a massive stroke, which I'm sure your head was spinning. And then do they take him off for a scan?
Yeah, they took him off for a CT scan, and then they came back and said he's had an ischemic stroke, which is the worst of the worst. And in order to save his life, we have to take him into surgery right now and saw off half of his skull to allow his brain to swell. If you don't do the surgery, he will die. Do you consent? And
that's
I'm just
literally how
here.
It happened. They're saying this to you.
Yes, and I'm like shaking, and they're pushing forms under my nose, and I'm just like crying and shaking and signing and like...
Have you called your parents?
Yeah, I did call my parents, and they got there. They were there by that point. Yeah, the doctor said, you need to call somebody to come be with you, and you know that it's bad at that point.
Right. So you have to sign consent, basically saying, yes, of course, because the other option is he will die. And so they go in, literally take off part of his skull so that his brain, so that it could swell. Is that what they were saying?
Yeah, because the stroke was going to cause
swelling,
the brain to swell anyway. So they wanted to give it room so it could swell and expand.
So he has this surgery, and very unexpected, obviously. He had just come out of surgery for cancer. What was that recovery like?
So they said that the first 24 hours would be really touch and go to see if he even lived. And he did live. And a few days later, he came off the vent. He was paralyzed completely on his left side. So we eventually had to leave ICU and go to rehab. But at that point, we were just so happy that he was alive. He was off the vent. I was able to have conversations with him, and his memory was still totally sharp. In fact, we joke because one of the first things he said to me was, "Where's my iPad?" And I'm like, "Honey, what about I love you?"
Right, anything.
Really sweet moment, but he's like, "Where's my iPad?" Like, I'm like, okay, he's back.
So I do have a question though. Like, he goes in for surgery to remove a portion of his lung, and he wakes up and he's had a massive stroke and he's paralyzed on his left side. Does he have memory of in between those times?
You know, what's crazy is I had told the nurses, I said, I don't want anyone talking when he is sedated about his skull being gone, because I want to be the one to tell him what's occurred when he wakes up. And so that was kind of the agreement, that no one would talk about it in front of him, but it ended up happening. And so when he came out of it, I said, babe, I need to talk to you about something. And he goes, I already know what happened when I was sedated. I heard them talking about my stroke and my skull. So he had heard everything.
Oh my gosh.
And he knew. So that's why when I hear people talking about sedation, and when they think people don't hear, sometimes they hear a lot more than you think they do, because he had heard and knew everything.
I've heard people say that before you have heard people say that as well. So he knew, woke up. What was his kind of like spirit like after that?
The most amazing thing about my husband, and this is why he inspires me to this day, is he did not once complain. You know, I think of myself and what I would have been doing at that point, and I would have been like, all right, Lord, first I'm going through cancer.
Right.
And now I've been paralyzed from a stroke. Like, where are you? What are you doing? Why aren't you with me? But he never, ever said anything like that. He was just positive. And most people that would come to visit him, I mean, he was keeping our spirits up, which is absolutely incredible.
What was the prognosis then? What were they telling you was going to be his life?
You know, they had said that it could go either way, you know, that we wouldn't really know until he got back to rehab how much of his body he would regain use of. And then the cancer, that was just put on the back burner, because we couldn't even focus on that right now. Right now, we're having to focus on the stroke and the debilitating effects that occurred from that.
It's so crazy, because earlier in your story, your struggle is IVF and then cancer. And then you're like, well, we can't focus on the IVF because we got to focus on the cancer. And now you're just like, well, we can't focus on this because we have to focus on the stroke. It just feels like you were constantly having to kind of even move in your heart and your brain, even of what are we focusing on in this moment? You know, what are we going to tackle now?
Yeah. And a lot of that, I was just in shock and trauma. And when your body goes into that mode, you just kind of operate on almost like robotically. And that's what I was just doing.
It's crazy.
Like, this is what we're doing. Okay, on to the next.
How old was Milo?
Milo was 11 months old.
Okay, so this is like a year in, that's right. So Milo's 11 months old, which is such a fun age.
Yeah.
How was your husband and Milo? What was their relationship? What did that look like with him in rehab and having surgeries? And how did Milo react to seeing his dad in the hospital?
It was really hard because we didn't let him go and see Joelle a whole lot, because I didn't want him emotionally to really have to deal with that. So it was very limited how much we would bring him up there. But, you know, he would get on the bed and want to roughhouse with Daddy, because that's how they used to be. And now there's cords and wires and, you know, part of his body he can't even use. And so it was really hard and really confusing for Milo as to why Daddy wasn't able to do what he used to do.
And that's hard. I mean, that's hard to explain to a 5-year-old, much less an 11-month-old, you know? So I'm sure you already felt as though you were parenting mom and dad and still trying to, like, let Milo be around his dad as much as you can. And then you're in rehab. Joelle's in rehab. Again, this is the second time, right?
Well, this is the first time he's in rehab.
Okay, first time
he was there for 2 weeks.
Rehab. Okay.
Yeah.
Going through that, and I was looking at the pictures in your book, which I love books that have, like, whenever I read people's stories, I always think, can you please put some pictures in this book? And you did, and so I'm so happy because I love seeing the pictures. But
I'm the same way, and I was really adamant. We have to have pictures in this book, guys.
Because it helps you see, like, oh, here's what Sarah looks like, and here's what Milo, you know, here's Joe, here's when they were in therapy. It's so good. I love that so much. Okay, so there's pictures of you in here, basically just working with him in therapy. I mean, how was y'all's relationship like? What does that look like for a husband and wife, for the wife to be taking care of the husband who can't really basically do hardly anything for himself? What did your relationship look like?
It wasn't typical. I had been his caretaker for years. So being the caretaker role wasn't something that was new to me. But to this degree, pushing him around in a wheelchair, this was totally out of the norm. But we didn't have a lot of typical husband-wife conversations when he was in rehab because, again, I was still having to work. So I was working throughout the day, and then I would go visit him for a few hours in the evening and then try to get home in enough time to tuck Milo into bed and spend a little time with him. So by the time I got to Joel, he had had a full day of therapy and he was really tired and worn out. So, our conversations were very brief and not too deep during that time.
Yeah. I can't even imagine everything that you were having, even when you just described it then about working all day, then going to see him and then being with your baby. Did you ever feel like, God, I don't know how much longer I can do this?
Yeah, it definitely felt like we were getting to some kind of critical point where I did not know how much longer I could run on adrenaline the way I had been.
Sometimes when I feel things and I say them out loud to God, I then feel like, ooh, I shouldn't feel that way. Did you struggle with, I don't know really how to feel in this situation?
Through all that I had been through, I got to the point where I was really raw with God, and I was able to say, I'm going to say out loud what I'm thinking because he knows it. And so why hide it, So I would have really, raw conversations. We had to have Milo's first birthday at the rehab center, and I smiled that day, with Joelle and with Milo, and then I got home and I was mad and sobbing and angry. And so I really went there with him, and I think that's okay to do that. I don't think he's afraid of our emotions.
No, I think you're right. And I think that, you can answer this for me. I feel like sometimes when we walk through things like this, looking back, I'm sure now you're looking back 3 years, you see how God was still faithful in the midst of those emotions that you had.
Yes. I could talk for an hour about suffering and the things that it produces within you, an unshakable belief in the goodness of God. Absolutely.
One of my favorite verses in Romans, and it talks about that, like suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope, and a hope which cannot be put to shame. And I always feel as though I would, comparing my story to yours, my suffering is very minimal, but I feel like we all have our own stories to carry and our own things that we've walked through. And I think when we start comparing them to each other is when that's not a good thing. But I look back even on times of my life and I'm like, man, that was the hardest year of my life. But because of that year, I know, I don't know why I'm crying because just talking to you about walking through this, but I look back on that year of suffering for me and I think, man, God, I know you better because of that. And I know parts of your character that I wouldn't have known this well had I not walked through that. And so I can say I'm almost kind of thankful for that. And I'm not putting words in your mouth at all, but that's my experience.
Well, I call it the best, worst years of my life because it really was. I love that verse in Job where he said, my ears have heard of you, but now my eyes have seen. And that's how I feel. I feel privileged in some ways that I've walked through so much because the relationship that came from that, like I said, it's unshakable. It's unshakable.
It's just, I think also that's hard to understand unless you've actually maybe walked through something. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'm selling people short as to understanding that or not.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a variety of ways, but suffering will push you towards it a little bit more quickly. It's on the fast track.
I agree. Did you say you listened to the show? Did you hear Catherine Wolfe when she was on?
I did, and I related to so many things where she was talking about her stroke. I was like, yep.
Yeah, and even when she talked about suffering.
Yes.
I mean, the way that she talks about suffering, she talks about in a way that she's grateful for it and what God's done in her life because of the suffering that she's been through. She experienced a stroke. If you haven't listened, go back and listen to that as well.
Well, nobody wants to pray and ask, God, will you give me suffering so I can know you better? We'd be crazy if we prayed that prayer.
Right. I think especially not to go, we won't go too far here, but especially Christians in North America.
Yes. Yeah, there's definitely a blessing and prosperity thing that we believe we should have. And I believed that most of my life. That's why when I first started suffering, I was like, but God, I've served you, and goodness is supposed to come, and mercy, and all of those things do come, but it doesn't mean that we don't have to suffer as well. I mean, I don't know where we got that idea, because it's all throughout Scripture.
For sure. You know? Yeah, it's a lie. Once we start to believing that I do all the right things, God's going to bless me, and surely I won't suffer, that is a lie and a trap. And what happens then, I think, Sarah, you can let me know what you think about this. I think that when we're believing that lie and then suffering comes, which suffering will come, just hold on if you haven't walked through it. I think then if you're believing that God is not going to allow, or there's not going to be suffering, and then when you get in the midst of it, it's when you start to go, whoa, like, has God left me?
Yeah.
Or am I a bad person? Like, you know what I mean? Your faith gets shaken when you start to believe that God will not allow his people to walk through suffering.
And that's, so many people think that the goodness of God is based on circumstance. And when we equate his goodness to circumstance, we are going to be shaken, and we are going to be let down as soon as we start suffering,
That's
but
so true.
But if we realize that his goodness, he is good, that is who he is, that's his character, that's his nature, and circumstances don't change or dictate that. Yeah. I mean, that's such an important truth to know and to understand.
It's so good. It's like when Jesus talks about like building your house on the rock, I always think about that, because it's like, okay, I want to know these foundational truths and I want to believe them, because he says the storms will come. Yes. And the storms come no matter where you built your house. Yes. Whether you build it on the sand that's not truth, or you build it on the truth, the rock of Jesus, the storms will come. And so I just think, like, man, it doesn't, like, I love what you just said. It's a part of his character. Hey guys, we'll get right back with my conversation with Sarah, but I want to thank another one of our sponsors, Pine Cove Camps. I want to tell you about the cool opportunity that they have right now. We've talked about Pine Cove on here before. The Ivies, we send our kids to Pine Cove camps. We love everything they're doing. They have amazing summer camps for kids in 2nd grade through 12th grade. And they even have week-long summer camps for whole families. But this is what I want to tell you about right now. Coming up in December, Pine Cove hosts a super cool weekend called Winterfest. Winterfest is for kids in 1st through 12th grades. And they come to camp for all the fun of summer camp packed into one weekend. It's like summer camp, but it's only cooler, as in cooler because it's December, or maybe it's cooler because it's more awesome. I don't know. The dates this year are December 16th through 18th, and this is a great opportunity for your kids to either be introduced to overnight camp. This is a great way to kind of move them into staying overnight, or to come back and be reunited with all the fun they had this summer. It's also, Mama, a great chance for you to get some of that last-minute shopping in, or attend that Christmas party without getting a babysitter. For more information, go to pinecove.com/winterfest. Okay, here's the rest of my conversation with Sarah. Okay, so rehab, you have his first birthday party there. And that was the last time you three were together.
Yeah, that was the last time that we were together as a family, because he had another stroke the next day, and he was transferred back to ICU. And from that point, he had another stroke, and he passed away.
So 2 more strokes happened after Milo's first birthday. Was that something that they had prepared you for could happen, or was once again this totally out of the blue?
Total shock. I mean, I thought once the first stroke was done and he had survived that, I thought that was the end of that. So it was a complete and total shock.
So where were you when the stroke happened the next day?
The next day, it was a Saturday, so thankfully I was able to get up there earlier than I typically would on a work day. So when I got there, he was resting and just napping, and so I sat there and read a magazine for a while to let him rest. And then after an hour, he woke up and he was super disoriented. And so I started asking him questions like I'd seen the nurses do in the past. What's your birthday? Who's the president? Things like that. And he was totally disoriented. So I ran down the hall screaming to get a nurse and a doctor. I said, something's wrong. I think he's had another stroke.
And so that would have been the third stroke?
That was the second one.
That was the second.
Yeah.
And then he had
the third.
I see the next morning you're asking him these questions, and then okay.
Yeah.
And so then what did they need to do after he had another stroke?
Well, they took him to the hospital in the ICU. At that point, they were asking me, what do we want to do for his life? Do you even, sometimes the most ethical thing to do is just to let him pass away. And I unloaded on a nurse when she told me that. I said, absolutely not. We are fighting until the very end because that was his wishes and that's what we're going to do. And so I said, use every measure you have to save his life. And they said, okay.
And so what did that look like?
So they put him in the ICU and they did something, it's where they put these things on his legs and on his arm to try to cool his body temperature down.
Okay.
It's like I don't want to say freeze, but it's kind of the same process. I mean, they lower his body temperature by a lot in order to try to keep his body and brain from swelling.
Okay.
And so they did that for a few days. And right before he was about to come off of all those machines, that's when he had the last stroke.
And then tell me about when was the last time that you saw him and what was that like?
Well, after he had the third stroke, they declared him legally brain dead. They have a series of tests that they do to declare that. And so I was forced, legally, I had to turn off the ventilator that was breathing life into his body. So the last day I saw him was when we had that ventilator turned off, and I sat there and I knew at that point that we were so far beyond hope, but I just knew that God could still heal him if he wanted to. And so until the very end, I was going to fight for him. So I sat on his bedside and I begged God to spare his life. And I felt a tangible shift in the room. I don't know if you've ever been in a room when someone's died, but in my experience, I mean, I could feel the shift in the room when his spirit was gone, and the shell that was there, I was like, that's not even my husband. It felt so different, the shift in the room.
Were you in there by yourself?
I was in there with my parents and two girlfriends that had been there with me throughout the whole process, and they left the room and gave me some time alone with him.
And what was that? Did you feel as though I need to say goodbye? What does that feel like when you're sitting there with the man that you love, that is a dad to your kids? I think I was in shock at that point because I had been fighting and believing for so long, and we're talking years. I mean, there was a 6-week intensity in the battle, but the battle was a 3-year long process. And so we'd been fighting so hard, and then just in an instant, it's over. And in an instant, everything about my life has changed. And in an instant, my son lost his father. In an instant, I lost my best friend and every plan that we had made together. And so I think my brain could not comprehend in that moment the true indications of what was happening in my loss. So, I mean, I sat there, I wept, I told him I loved him, I told him I was proud of him, and that I would see him again one day, and left the room. Sarah, I read this last night, but feel like listening to you, I just cannot even imagine what that feels like. And at the same time, I can totally hear like the peace of God that is in your voice when you talk about it. And the way that it felt like that God was he was your rock in that moment.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how people go through loss without a faith and a hope, because I had that hope that I would see him again. And we say that a lot in the Christian culture, but it becomes extremely real when it's you and when it's your best friend and the love of your life. And you think, okay, this hurts so bad, but the hope that I cling to, the shred of hope, is that I will see you again and all wrong things will be made right. And until that day, it's going to be hard, but I'm going to run my race until I get to see you again.
And it's truth. I mean, that's the reality of what it is. So that day, your husband passes away, and you are now widow, mom to one, alone without your helper and your best friend, and your lover, and all of these things. All of a sudden, it's gone. It's been 3 years. And a lot has happened in 3 years. We're like 45 minutes into this show, and we could chat for another 45 minutes on what has happened for the next 3 years. Yeah. But before we get to what's happened in the next 3 years, and we will just briefly cover that because we've been chatting for so long and it's so good. But I mean, what is that? How do you even describe to someone what these 3 years have been like of all of a sudden, here I am, I was married and now my husband's gone. And I mean, how old were you? 33?
I was 31.
31.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been the hardest 3 years of my life. Again, I would say in some ways it's been the best 3 years of my life, just because of the ways that God has shown himself completely faithful to our family. And it's by his grace, literally, that I'm still here. You know, he has walked so closely beside me. But it still is something that we're learning to live with. You know, we just or I don't want to say celebrated the 3-year anniversary, but we just commemorated the 3rd year anniversary of his passing, and it was still hard. It never. I always say you can't move on, but you can move forward. It's never something that you're over or that you get past. And people think, oh, well, it's been a long time, so you must miss them less. It's like, if you don't see your kids in 1 week versus a month, do you miss them less? No, you miss them more. So we miss him more, and that aspect of it definitely gets harder.
What are some of your favorite things that remind you of him, like around your house or day-to-day life?
Well, my son is a mini-me version of my husband. And so he is constantly doing things that I'm like, oh my goodness, okay, Joel. And he always laughs because, I mean, he stands like him. They have so many weird little quirks that are the same, but that is such a gift because, I see my husband and him. Yeah.
Oh, that's so fun. Yeah. So you have a daughter as well, which we haven't even mentioned.
Yes.
One of the coolest things, if you're listening, you remember way back in the conversation, you guys talked about how you froze. Now, you're going to have to clarify this for me because I don't know if you froze embryos or you just had his sperm still frozen.
Well, we had that too, but we had 4 embryos and I implanted 2, so I had 2 remaining embryos left. Yeah.
And so when did the thought come, okay, we have these 2 embryos. Okay. I'm going to use them.
Well, there's 2 parts to that. I had a dream once when I was pregnant with my son about holding this little baby girl, and her name was Ellis. And when I woke up, I looked up the meaning of her name, and the name meant Jehovah is God. And that's exactly what my husband's name meant too. And I had never heard of this name, Ellis. I'm not a Grey's Anatomy fan. I hear that there's an Ellis on that show.
Oh, I don't even know.
But I'd never heard of the name before. And when I found out I was pregnant with a boy, we just kind of tucked that name away and thought, well, one day if we have a girl, that'll be her name. Well, when my husband was in rehab one day, I was rubbing his back, and he all of a sudden had this moment where he was so lucid, and he said, honey, I need to talk to you about something. And I said, what? And he said, you and I are going to have another baby, and it's going to be a girl, and you know what to name her. You need to name her Ellis. And I just looked at him, and he's in rehab and he's paralyzed. And I'm like thinking in my mind, there's no way we'll have another baby.
Right.
And so I just kind of said, okay, honey, okay. And he said, no, you need to listen to me. I'm really serious. We are going to have another baby, and it's going to be a girl. And I said, okay. And so right after he died, almost immediately I recalled that conversation, and all of a sudden it took on a whole new meaning for me.
And so how long after he died did you think, or not, because you immediately said you had thought about it, but when did you actually entertain the idea of, okay, this is how it's going to go down, I'm going to do this actually?
Well, I had a conversation the night of the funeral with his 4 best friends. They all live all over the United States, and they were all there. And I thought, okay, this is the only time I'll have everyone in one space. And I keep thinking about this conversation. I just need to talk to them and get some clarity. And I was worried that they would be like, are you crazy? No, you can do that.
Right.
They weren't. Every single one of them was like, you have to do this, right? Like, this is totally meant to happen. And so from that point on, it took a lot of prayer and a lot of thought and a lot of consideration, but I finally decided, okay, I'll have them implanted and put the results in God's hands.
Because knowing good and well that neither one of them could take.
Yeah, I thought,
that's the risk, right?
And that's what I prayed. It's about a 30% chance that you'll get pregnant on embryos that have been frozen and unthawed. So I thought, the odds are really low, and it's really going to take a miracle, for me to get pregnant. And if this is meant to be, I'm just putting the results in God's hands.
And so first time, there you are pregnant.
Lo and behold, pregnant with a girl, just like you said.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So you walked through this pregnancy alone. I know you had your family and support. But what did you imagine emotionally that would be like? And then what was it really emotionally like doing that alone without Joelle?
I think I had prepared myself for it to be hard. I knew it would be a lot different of an experience, but I remember showing up that first day for the doctor's appointment and seeing all the husbands with their wives in the waiting room. And that's the same waiting room he and I had been in just like a year and a half prior. And there was that first moment where I was like, oh my goodness, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm strong enough to do this. And it was literally just relying on God every single time. A lot of times my girlfriends would come with me, and that was a good appointment because I had some support, but there were lots that I had to do alone, and those were they were hard.
And then you have your sweet baby girl, Ellis.
Yes.
And she's 21 months old now.
Yes.
And you're just mama to two, writing books, doing your thing.
Yeah, trying to balance it all.
Single parenting.
Yeah,
that's a whole nother show.
Yes, I know, right?
Oh, single parenting. You guys are just amazing. I've had a few other single parents on the show, and some of them by death of a husband. I've had Bailey Heard was on here. She lost her husband as well. And then my friend Alicia, and just so many different perspectives. But I think it's good to shine light on single parenting as well, especially in the church, because some people can think, oh, well, this is not the best scenario for your kids or whatever. And again, this was not your decision. And I'm sure you never imagined there'd be a day when you were single parenting two kids.
No. And, within the church, they talk a lot about the nuclear family, and this is how God designed it. And, I wish there was a little bit more awareness that everybody's situation isn't the same. And I never dreamt that this would be my situation. And I know that there's statistics and all that, but I really believe that God is way bigger than any statistic, and when you look at the lineage of Jesus, he came from a lot of people that were broken and messed up circumstances, but the story of him was just one of redemption. And I believe that God is able to redeem our stories.
Completely.
And, I know it would have been how we planned it, and my mind would have been perfect for my husband to be here with us, but that's not what we have. And so where I am now is I'm just believing that God will take it and he'll use it, and that our story will be triumphant.
And it is, because he's the center of that story. Yeah. When you sit down with Milo and Ellis and you talk to them about their daddy, what do you say?
I got the greatest advice from a widow one time. She said, talk about your husband so much that your kids could imagine him coming through the door at any time. And I thought that was such wise advice, because we never wanted him to be a taboo subject in my home. I never want my kids to feel like they can't talk about him. We have photos all over the house. And whenever my kids in particular do something that remind me of him, I try to point it out to them so they can feel that connection to where they came from.
Yeah.
And so, they're little, and I try to tell them about how much their daddy loved them and what a hero he was and how much he misses him. And, it's hard because we have to have conversations with my son at 4 that I never thought we would have to have about death and healing and dying and heaven. And it gets deep and it's hard, but I think in the end it will make him a better version of himself to know and understand these things from such a young age.
Yeah. And we would be like foolish to think that God's not going to use this entire story even for your kids' lives.
Absolutely. I believe that completely.
Yeah. He has something big in store for them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, Sarah, man, thank you for sharing your story. Okay. Now I need to know, we're going to move on.
Okay.
What are you reading?
Okay.
Because I was reading your book last night in bed. So what were you reading in bed last night?
Well, I've got 2 different ones. One is A Severe Mercy by Sheldon Vanauken and C.S. Lewis. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
I haven't.
But it is about his path to faith, and then he loses his wife. And so he goes on this whole journey of reconciling his faith with loss. And C.S. Lewis was going through the same exact thing. So they're swapping letters and swapping stories and kind of just trying to get to the bottom of where they land on this whole faith thing in the midst of extreme suffering. So
Okay, that sounds amazing.
it is incredible. I read it like one chapter at a time, and then I just have to rest for a while because it's just so much. But
That's a lot.
I love it.
Speaking of C.S. Lewis, I have these books, and I don't know what they're called, but it's like it's kids' books, and we have one about C.S. Lewis, and it's about his life. And my son Caden picked it up, and he's like, "Is this the guy that wrote Chronicles of Narnia?"
Yes.
And I was like, "Yes, it is." And then he flipped over the back, and he saw that he died in like, I don't know, 1963 or something. I don't know. I'll make that up, whatever. But he died. And then Caden, he's 12, he was like, "So he never saw the movies?" And I was like, "No, he never saw the movies." But he was just so concerned that C.S. Lewis never got to see the movies of his books. But anyhow, okay, so that sounds amazing, that book.
Yeah, it's a great one. And then the other is called Wild Things by Stephen James and David Thomas, and it's understanding the heart and mind of a boy. And I feel like, my husband isn't here to help me with my son. And so I've really started to be really intentional. I think 1 through 3, there's kind of some grace to just love on them, keep them fed, keep them
keep everybody alive.
Yeah. But at age 4, you have to really start to kind of dig in. And so this book is about understanding the heart and mind of a boy. And it's been amazing so far. Amazing.
The cover's really cute too, with the 2 little boys in their superhero caves fighting.
Yes. And several of my friends have read it and they recommended it, and I've loved it. So I highly recommend it if you're a mom of boys, especially if you're a single mom.
Yeah. It's looking for ways to kind of get in there with things that would be done for the dad. Okay, so that's great. I love it. Anything else, or those 2?
Just those 2 for now.
Okay. All right.
But there's a huge stack always, constantly.
I always have a huge stack too. It's like crazy. Yeah. Where do you read mostly?
In my room.
Okay.
At night or early in the morning, just whenever I can squeeze it in. It's a lot harder than it used to be, but I do it when I can. I love
the babies. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So what are 3 things you're loving?
Okay. So I am loving that we are a couple weeks away from fall because I love sweaters and I love the state fair.
Yeah, I've never been. Well, you're in Oklahoma, but are you talking about the Oklahoma State Fair? I'm assuming.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
well, we have one here in Texas, obviously. I've never been.
Oh my goodness, girl. You have to go. If just for the food alone, I mean, it is quite the experience.
Where everything's
and the people watching
yes.
for that.
Yes.
But we love it. And then the last thing is college football because, I mean, around here, that's all we're talking about in August and September on. So I love it.
I do love college football so much.
There's something about it that's just different than the NFL.
Because I like it. Well, I have all kinds of feelings on it these days, but I like it too because it's just a little bit more like these are like young men. They don't have all the pressures, which is not true these days. They have a lot of pressures on them. But you know what I mean? They're not getting paid millions of dollars.
Yeah. It seems kind of pure and innocent.
Although it's probably not, but yes. Yeah, it seems that way.
Yeah.
Although these days with college football, it's kind of scary sometimes about it. But I mean the pure and innocent because sometimes whatever. We're not going to go into college football scandals. But anyhow, okay, sweaters. Can I confess I hate sweaters?
What? Do you like cardigans?
Yes.
See, a cardigan is a light sweater. So technically,
yes,
you like light sweaters.
Sweaters, I think they make me feel confined.
Yeah, I can see that.
And so I'm more of like a layer kind of person, and I'm worried I'm going to get hot. And then what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I like hoodies too, but I'm trying to
me too.
par that down. I'm like, what is the age cutoff?
No,
for a hoodie?
I'm 38, and in the fall I wear a hoodie and a t-shirt every day.
Yes, me too. I love them.
Me too. Okay, so was that your 3 things? College football.
That was my one thing.
Okay, good. College football, sweaters, and fall. One thing.
Yeah.
Okay, what's number 2?
Yeah. Okay, so I found this YouTube channel, and it is called Fitness Blender, and they have over 700 free workout videos.
Okay,
and
say the name again.
Fitness Blender.
Okay.
And I've used working out a lot in my process of grief, just to get some stress out. I'm not a fan at heart really of working out, but to get the endorphins going and the stress relief and to sweat, it just is kind of an outlet of a place to go. So that's something that I've started doing.
Fitness Blender. Love it.
And they do it against a white background, and they don't have any music playing, so I can use my own playlist.
That's the best.
Yeah, which may or may not have some Bieber on it.
See? Of course.
He's good for working out, too.
Yes.
So I love that.
Okay, what's your third thing?
Okay, the last thing is chai tea.
Oh.
I don't drink coffee. So when I meet my girls at Starbucks, I'll get a chai tea, and I've always gotten it hot. And this summer, I wasn't drinking them because I thought it's too hot for a chai tea. But my mom said you could get it iced. And I got it iced, and I'm embarrassed to say how life-changing this has been for me, because now I can have a chai tea in the winter months and the summer months.
It's the best thing that's happened to you.
I know. And I literally have told 3 people this week, I'm like, guys, did you know you can get a chai tea iced? And they're like, yeah, you goofball. We did that.
Hello, we always been doing this.
I'm like, this is rocking my world, you guys. And they're like, okay.
I've never had a chai tea.
Oh my goodness, Jamie.
I know.
It's the best.
I was on a girls trip this week, and I think one of the girls, that's what she got every time we stopped for coffee. And I should have asked to try it, but I've never had one.
I love chai teas. I'm not a coffee drinker whatsoever, but I will down me some chai tea. It's the best.
I do love me some coffee, so.
I wish I did, because it could help keep me awake with all the running around I do.
Yeah. Mine's more like habitual. Like, I just love the act of getting up in the morning and drink, which I know you could do that with tea, so whatever. But it's what I do. Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, Sarah, I love your 3 things. I love what you're reading. And I'm so grateful that you came on to share your story with us. And so I'm going to put all the links up. And your book, From Death Through Rise, I'm going to put a link up to that as well. Because there's more to your story, too. Like, you delivered your daughter, and then she got really, really sick. I mean, there's more to the story. So we just touched the surface of it today. But, man, I just want to thank you for sharing the hope that you have in the midst of these circumstances and trials and sufferings. And I remember a couple of years ago, I read 2 books in the same year about moms who had lost kids. And one of the books, there was zero hope. I mean, her life was over. She was devastated. She was miserable for the year since.
Yeah.
And the other one, it was a terrible, terrible story just the same, but she had a hope that wasn't shaken, and that hope came through in the book, and that's what you're doing as well through your book and through your words. And so thank you for allowing the life circumstances you've been through and the suffering that you've walked through to actually be a minister for the gospel. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you, Jamie. Thanks for the way you champion women and you give everyone a platform to share their stories, and it's a really powerful thing. So thank you.
You're welcome. I love showing what other people are doing. I just want to cheer. I want to be a cheerleader for everybody.
Well, you do it well.
Well, thanks. So I'm going to cheer you on until I'm going to go get your book. So that's what I'm going to do for you.
Thanks, girl.
Awesome. Okay, thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Jamie.
Guys, I knew that you would love it. I hope you had your tissues. I loved chatting with Sarah, and I'm just so proud of her for getting her story out there and talking about it and being bold in her faith and bold in where God has taken her. And the funny thing about this is there's so much more to her story that we never even touched the surface on with her baby girl. And so I encourage you to get her book, and she talks about it there. But it was so fun to chat with her. Today's show is edited by Logan Garza. The music is from Jason Poe. Next week, my guest is Allie Worthington, and it was so much fun to talk with her. She's a full-time working woman, plus mama to 5 boys. She's the executive director of Propel Women, and her newest book out is called Breaking Busy, which, oh my gosh, don't we all want that? So tune in next week for my guest, Allie. Okay, guys, enjoy your week. Happy November. I hope it's fall where you live. Share this show with a girlfriend and have a happy hour with a friend. I will see you guys next week.